Being the good guy feels safe until you realize it's the reason no one takes you seriously. However, the more agreeable you are, the less presence you have. This isn't just modern psychology. Machiavelli mapped this weakness 500 years ago. In this video, you'll get 5 ruthless reasons to drop the good guy act, and the tactics to replace it with real presence. Before we go deeper, let's clear something up. Machiavelli wasn't a villain. He wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was a political surgeon, cutting away illusions to expose what actually works in the real world. He watched rulers rise and fall, empires built and destroyed, not by evil, but by naivety. And he noticed something disturbing. The men who clung to moral purity, who tried to be good in the eyes of everyone, were the first to be betrayed, manipulated, or erased. So he wrote this. It is not essential that a prince should have all the good qualities, but it is essential that he should seem to have them. In other words, you don't need to be good. You need to be perceived as good when it serves your position. This is the foundation of power psychology. People don't follow reality, they follow perception. And if you're more concerned with being seen as nice than being respected, you'll spend your life being tolerated, not trusted. Used, not chosen. Modern masculinity has sold men a myth that being agreeable, harmless, and emotionally available makes you powerful. It doesn't. It makes you replaceable. This video is a psychological autopsy of that lie, and a guide to rebuilding your identity through presence, clarity, and control. Ready to see the cracks? Let's get into reason 1. So, the first reason you must drop the good guy mask is this. You're predictable. And predictability is weakness. Nice guys operate in patterns. They text back immediately. They agree without pause. They offer help without being asked. They apologize before anyone even notices a mistake. And over time, these patterns form a script, one that everyone around them learns by heart. A script that makes them emotionally legible, easy to manipulate, and ultimately, forgettable. People don't respect what they can predict. They use it. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. Power doesn't thrive in comfort, it thrives in unpredictability. A prince must learn how not to be good, and use that knowledge or not, according to necessity. In other words, your power comes not from consistency, but from the ability to break it, strategically. Because once others can predict your reactions, they can start scripting your behavior for you. They'll test boundaries they know you won't defend. They'll pressure you emotionally, knowing you'll fold. They'll smile at your kindness, while silently pocketing your power. The good guy prides himself on being emotionally available, endlessly agreeable, and instantly responsive. But that kind of transparency comes at a cost. It makes you easy to read and easy to control. He thinks his consistency is a virtue, that it builds trust, that it makes him dependable. But here's what it really does. It strips away tension. It removes mystery. It makes him psychologically cheap. And what people can predict, they begin to devalue. That's the paradox. In trying to be loved, he becomes boring. In trying to be safe, he becomes invisible. In trying to be always available, he becomes quietly disposable. Unpredictability isn't cruelty, it's psychological leverage. It signals that your time and attention are not automatic, that your presence must be earned, that you operate on your terms. Tactic: learn to interrupt the pattern. Let others feel your delay. Hold the silence instead of rushing to fill it. Assess before responding. Don't explain your every move. Let your timing become part of your presence. Because the moment people stop being certain about what you'll do next is the moment they start paying attention. The man who is unreadable cannot be played. And the one who breaks rhythm breaks expectation. That's where power begins. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology behind that, especially why explaining yourself lowers your authority, watch Explaining Yourself Makes You Weak. Machiavelli breaks it down. You'll see exactly how overclarifying kills tension, signals insecurity, and makes you easier to dismiss. The link is on the screen and in the description section. The second reason you need to drop the good guy mask is this. You avoid conflict, and every time you do, you hand over control. You tell yourself you're choosing peace, that it's not worth the fight. That silence is maturity. But most of the time, you're not protecting peace. You're protecting the fragile image you've built. The image of being nice, easygoing, understanding. And you'll trade your instincts, your values, even your dignity to protect that image, just so nobody gets uncomfortable. You let the girl talk over you. You let your colleague take credit. You let someone cross your line, and instead of addressing it, you explain it away. You smile, nod, swallow the tension, and try to be the bigger person. But the truth is, there's nothing big about shrinking yourself for the comfort of others. Here's the brutal reality. People learn how to treat you based on what you tolerate. If you can't say no without guilt, if you avoid friction at all costs, if you respond to disrespect with silence or softness, it won't be long before they stop hearing you altogether. Machiavelli understood this dynamic with ruthless clarity. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must inevitably come to grief among so many who are not good. Because when you avoid confrontation, you're not just avoiding discomfort, you're sending a message. And that message is, you're safe to ignore. People might like you. They might even praise your calmness. But deep down, they know you won't fight for your values. You won't draw a hard line. You won't risk your image. And because of that, they won't trust you with leadership, responsibility, or real respect. They'll keep you around until something stronger walks in. The good guy believes he's showing emotional maturity by not reacting. But what he's actually showing is passivity. And in the psychology of power, passivity is a vacuum. It invites others to step in and dominate. You've been conditioned to think confrontation is dangerous. That standing firm is aggressive. That defending your position makes you selfish. So you soften every edge, explain your intent, and backpedal whenever someone pushes. But here's what you need to understand. Conflict doesn't damage relationships, silence does. Unspoken tension doesn't disappear. It builds. Quiet resentment grows roots. And the longer you avoid the fight, the more violent it becomes when it finally erupts. You don't need to yell. You don't need to intimidate. But you do need to mean what you say, and say it without apology. Tactic: speak once, clearly. Drop the nervous disclaimers and empty qualifiers. Say no when you mean no. Don't over-explain. If someone crosses a line, call it what it is. Calmly, firmly, without looking for permission. And when the moment calls for it, let your silence carry weight. Not as avoidance, but as power. Because if you keep trying to avoid every storm, don't be surprised when your life starts to feel like weather controlled by other people. The third reason you need to drop the good guy mask is this. You become invisible. Not physically, not overnight, but psychologically and socially, you start to disappear. Not because people are cruel, but because you've trained them to stop noticing you. You make yourself available at all times. You say what's expected. You avoid disagreement, avoid tension, avoid anything that might draw too much attention to yourself. You play it safe, so safe that you no longer register as someone with real weight in the room. At first, people appreciate it. You're easy to talk to, easy to manage, easy to predict. But the truth is, easy becomes invisible. Because people don't remember what didn't challenge them. They don't feel connected to what never revealed any depth. They don't respect what never stood firm. You thought you were being respectful by softening your opinions. You thought you were being supportive by always stepping back. But over time, that pattern turns you into background noise, present, but never impactful. And here's where the real damage happens. Even when you have something to say, they don't hear it. Even when you show up, they don't feel it. Even when you try to lead, they don't follow. Because by then, they've already put you in the harmless box, and they've stopped looking for anything more. Machiavelli warned about this through the lens of power and perception. Men judge more by the eye than the hand. In other words, what people see in you, not what you intend, is what shapes your influence. And if all they ever see is restraint, self-editing, and non-confrontation, then you've already disappeared long before they've even made their decision. This is how the good guy becomes invisible. Not by lacking value, but by constantly hiding it under politeness. Tactic: stop editing yourself into blandness. Let people feel your conviction, your focus, your refusal to over-accommodate. Say the thing you believe, not just the version that will make others comfortable. When you walk into a room, let your posture, your silence, and your presence say, "I'm here, and I'm not adjusting myself to be tolerated." Because a man who cannot be felt eventually cannot be followed. And a man who refuses to be seen eventually gets forgotten, even by the people he tried hardest to please. Now that you understand why the good guy becomes invisible, we're moving into even deeper territory. You've already seen how predictability, conflict avoidance, and self-erasure cost you power. But the next two reasons are just as critical and even more internal. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Which reason hit hardest, and why are you ready to drop the mask? Leave a comment below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this resonates, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this message reach the men who need it most. Let's move to reason 4. There's a part of you that most people never see. And if you've worn the good guy mask long enough, you've probably stopped seeing it too. It's the part of you that wants more. That resents being overlooked. That wants to speak louder, aim higher, take more, but keeps getting shut down in the name of being nice. This is the 4th reason you need to drop the mask. The good guy suppresses his dark drive and pays for it. Because the truth is, what you suppress doesn't disappear. It just turns against you. You bury your anger, your hunger, your ambition. You label it dangerous, selfish, immature. But all that energy has to go somewhere. And when it's denied long enough, it doesn't just die, it rots. You start snapping at the wrong people for the wrong reasons. You procrastinate on things that matter. You feel resentment in moments that should bring pride. And slowly you disconnect, not just from others, but from yourself. You forget how to want something openly. You feel guilty for being competitive. You filter your intensity until there's nothing left but a quiet, tired version of you that no longer scares anyone, and no longer inspires anyone either. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the rejected parts of yourself that you push out of you. But Machiavelli didn't romanticize it. You must learn how not to be good. Because if you don't understand that darker part of yourself, someone else will weaponize it against you. You were told that men should be gentle. That desire is dangerous. That wanting too much makes you arrogant or aggressive. So you lowered your voice, controlled your gaze, softened your posture, and trained yourself to feel bad for simply wanting to win. And here's the consequence. You became emotionally safe and strategically useless. Because leadership doesn't come from neutrality. Presence doesn't come from politeness. And power never comes from denial. That dark drive you keep trying to kill, that's your edge. That's your ambition. That's your clarity under pressure. And every time you push it down to make others more comfortable, you lose a piece of yourself that was built for impact. Tactic: you don't need to unleash your darkness blindly. You need to own it. Speak with conviction, even when it makes others uneasy. Compete without apology. Want without guilt. Channel your aggression into training, discipline, direction. Let people feel your ambition without you having to explain it away. You don't become dangerous by being cruel. You become dangerous by becoming whole. And that only happens when you stop trying to be good in everyone's eyes and start becoming complete in your own. We've come to the final reason, the one that explains why so many men feel lost even when they're liked. You surrender your identity just to be accepted. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, through a series of small, forgettable compromises. You soften your tone so you don't seem aggressive. You hold back your real opinions so you don't create tension. You nod when you disagree. You offer support when what you really wanted to do was lead. At first, it feels like maturity, emotional awareness, social grace. But what you're really doing is erasing yourself. You reshape your personality to avoid being alone. You scan the room before you speak. You say what's expected. You mirror what's safe. And over time, you forget where the performance ends and where you begin. This is how the good guy surrenders his identity to be accepted. He builds a version of himself that people will tolerate and then hides inside it. He lowers his voice, lowers his standards, lowers his presence, and then wonders why no one sees him. Machiavelli understood the danger of pleasing everyone. He who seeks the favor of all ends with the respect of none. Because if your identity changes based on who you're around, you don't have identity, you have costume changes. You start to resent how invisible you've become. But you created it. Not by being kind, but by being compliant. By placing approval above presence. By choosing to be liked instead of known. And here's the harsh truth. No one can respect a man who hides who he is to stay accepted. Because respect requires edge. And edge requires clarity. And clarity always offends someone. Say what you believe, even if it makes things awkward. Make decisions without over-explaining. Let people walk away if they don't like the real version of you. Because the moment you stop managing perception, you start reclaiming power. If someone rejects your truth, they were never really connected to you, just the performance you offered. You can't be followed if you can't be seen. And you can't be seen if you're always adjusting to stay liked. Drop the mask, or disappear inside it. By now you've seen the 5 reasons. You know what the good guy loses, and what it costs to keep wearing the mask. But change doesn't happen just because you understand the problem. It happens when you start making different decisions, in ordinary, everyday situations. So now, let's take it further. Let's look at what this actually sounds like. Real-life moments where these tactics apply. Quietly, powerfully, and without warning. Because if you can't use them in conversations, texts, relationships, or conflict, then they're just theory. It usually starts in a quiet moment. You're sitting across from someone, maybe a woman you've been seeing, maybe a friend, maybe a colleague, and they say something that crosses a line. Not enough to explode over. Just enough to sting. Maybe they take a small jab at your past. Or laugh at your ambition like it's a joke. And for a second, something in you flinches. Not because it hurt, but because you caught yourself about to smile through it. That's the moment. That's where the old instinct kicks in, the one that tells you to keep the peace, play it cool, let it slide. Because if you react, it might get awkward. If you speak up, you might look sensitive. If you challenge them, you might lose something. Their comfort, their approval, their image of you. But this time, you don't nod. You don't smile. You just hold the pause. You stay present. You let the silence expand, not to punish, but to reveal. Because what you're doing in that moment isn't reacting emotionally. You're letting reality settle in. You're letting them feel what they've said, without rescue. And without raising your voice, you say, "Don't do that again." That's it. It doesn't need to be dramatic. You're not seeking revenge. You're showing presence. That's the kind of small moment where the shift begins. And most people will never notice it, but they'll feel it. Because something changes when you stop performing for comfort and start holding the room with composure. Or maybe it's more subtle. You're walking out of a room, phone in hand. You see a message from someone you've been investing in. A short, cold response. You already know what your old self would do. Try harder. Add a follow-up. Make it playful. Reignite their interest. But something inside you stays still. You look at the message and decide, no reply. Not out of pettiness, but because you no longer reward disinterest with energy. You don't chase lukewarm attention. You let it die. That silence doesn't feel like rejection anymore. It feels like self-respect. And over time, these small decisions start stacking. You notice you speak slower, not because you're unsure, but because you're not performing. You stop explaining yourself, because you no longer assume you owe that to everyone. You say no without giving 5 reasons. You walk away from low-effort connections without needing a dramatic goodbye. You become steady. The world doesn't notice it immediately, but you do. In how people speak to you. In how they listen. In how they adjust, not because you're loud, but because you no longer bend. And that's what all these tactics are really for. They're not about control. They're about restoring gravity to your presence. So the next time someone tests you, with a joke, a delay, a request that crosses a line, you don't flinch, explain, or compensate. You hold frame. You speak less. You let the moment work for you. That's strategy in everyday life. That's how the shift becomes real, not in theory, but in tone. Not in what you say, but in what you're no longer willing to say. And if you stay consistent, If you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop folding into other people's frames, something changes. Not all at once. But it starts to show up in the way people look at you. In the way they listen when you speak. In how they hesitate before interrupting, because now your silence carries more weight than your words used to. You stop being the backup option. You stop being the man they expect to wait, to adjust, to ask permission. You become the one they notice, the one they consider first, the one they quietly recalibrate around. And it goes deeper than social dynamics. You start trusting yourself again. Your thoughts feel sharper. Your decisions come faster. You stop second-guessing what you feel because you've finally stopped asking if you're allowed to feel it. Conversations get cleaner. Boundaries get quieter. Confidence stops being something you perform. It becomes your baseline. And the best part? People respect you more, even the ones who don't like you. Because now, you're not offering a version of yourself to be accepted. You're offering your presence, and letting them respond however they need to. This is where power stops being an idea, and becomes a lived experience. You've seen the reasons, you've seen the tactics. You've seen how to use them in real situations, with clarity, presence, and control. Now take the next step. Because this transformation doesn't stop here, it sharpens. Click the Power as Design playlist. It's where you learn how to set the frame, use silence as a weapon, and become the one people can't ignore, even when you say nothing at all. This isn't about talking more. It's about becoming undeniable. Watch the playlist. Then walk into your next conversation like someone who never traded power for permission again.